Good evening and welcome to another episode of Backyard Farmer. We've got a great program for you this evening as we answer your gardening questions. You can submit a question, just dial 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Emailed questions and those JPEG pictures get sent to byf@unl.edu. We answer those on a future show if we possibly can. We also need to know as much information about your problem or your issue as you can give us, including what part of the state you live in. You can just give us the county. You don't have to give us your address. Backyard Farmer is also available during the week on our social media network that includes Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. So to start the program, Wayne, down from your neck of the woods, what have you brought?
That's right. I brought a piece off of a hawthorn tonight, and on it we find pear slugs. Pear slugs can occur on both pears and hawthorns. They're these little, almost bird-dropping like little things here on the top of the leaf. That's one of the unusual things about them, is that they feed on the top of the leaf. You can see the feeding damage right next to them there, where they're picking off just that top layer and leaving that papery part underneath. Now this particular tree was about a 10 to 12 foot tall hawthorn tree. I had to work to find the 5 or 6 individuals that I found on it. So in this case, I would not recommend any kind of control measure to handle these. But if they do get thick, just like rose slugs, pear slugs also have a hard time crawling back up on the plant. So if you give them a good hose down with a good stream of water, you're gonna take care of them in that way.
Excellent, and I'll bet there are people who think that's rust when they look at it.
I didn't bring any of it, but I could have brought some leaves that had rust on it as well from this particular tree, but it wasn't very thick as well.
So diagnostics, good idea.
Always
okay,
a good
Rock,
idea.
you have a garden treasure.
All based on your perspective, Kim. Actually, we're going to talk about this 2 times tonight. This is painter's palette. As many of you know, it is a really showy, very beautiful ornamental. It's relatively deer resistant. It attracts butterflies. So you're saying, why would we think this is a problem? It's a member of the knotweed family, and that doesn't have anything to do with it being as invasive as it can be. But it can become one of those, what do you call them, garden thugs? It is capable, clearly, of doing that. But so we have a picture later in the show, and we have somebody where it's kind of gotten out of hand. And when you look at that picture, you're going to say, wow, I can see how that would be a little bit problematic. But I personally really like this plant. It's got really good berries on it, and I believe you've mentioned that it can spread from seed. I know it does spread from rhizomes. But we're going to talk a little bit about control later. So one person's weed is another man's flower. So it's just be aware of that sort of thing. And when you purchase your plants or put your plants in the ground, you got to be careful that they don't get away from you. And in this case, there's a reasonable explanation as to why, and we're going to try to help the homeowner out and get that under control.
Perfect. Thanks, Rock. Lauren, you've outdone yourself with rots and spots.
I just got several of them tonight, and a lot of peaches and apricots are ripening now or have been ripening. We might be seeing some things that are fungal diseases on them, or maybe concerned about, post-harvest disease management to keep those fruits fresh. So this one here, we can see some scab injury from actually a wound, and there you can see some like bird feeding possibly, and then some scab infection afterwards. On this one, next to it, looks a lot like a potato, doesn't it? It's all scabby. Different fungus, but similar type of symptom from what we would see. And then finally here, we've got a soft rot. That's one of our soft rot, more like a brown rot type of fruit rot. So with all of these, if you have them and you want to manage them before they happen, that's something we talk about in the spring as far as a fruit tree spray program. But once you're in the harvest stage, to try to keep those fruits fresh as long as possible, there's a real simple process you can do, and that is just dipping that fruit in water that is 140 degrees for 60 seconds. So if it's at 140, if it goes down to even 130 degrees for 60 seconds, that's the key. Dry them out and then put them in the fridge, and they'll keep much longer than fruit that you haven't done that to, if you have brown rot especially.
And it sounds so counterintuitive. It sounds like you're going to end up with apricot pie.
Yeah, but it's not as high as like your blanching temperatures and things where you'd be boiling them quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
So just having them though at that temperature for 60 seconds is enough to really keep those spores and inactivate them or kill them to where you won't have infection in the fridge.
Cool, good.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, you have leafage.
Yeah, I do. So we've had some storms rolling across Nebraska in the last few weeks, and what I wanted to talk about today a little bit is just tree structure and branch structure. There are things that you can do on your trees to try to make them stronger in the landscape. So imagine that this is the trunk of a tree, and these are the side branches, okay? This is a ginkgo. Look how wide these angles are. We have almost a 90-degree angle here between the main trunk and the side branch. This is a very strong joint on this tree. The branch and the main trunk here develop a lot of interconnected tissue which tie them together, and it makes this very strongly attached to the tree. So this type of branch is very unlikely to fail or break out of a tree in a storm. So this is ginkgo. Here we have an oak. Now you can see we also have a really nice branch angle here. It's not quite 90 degrees like the ginkgo, but it's pretty good. It's much wider than 45-degree angle. Okay, here's a couple of bad examples. Here's one from a maple tree. I think this is probably a red maple cross of some kind, maybe red maple, silver maple. Look how narrow this branch angle is right here. We're getting narrower than 45 degrees here. There isn't nearly as much physical connection between if this were the trunk and this side branch. And this, under wind load or heavy snow load in the winter, this is very likely to break out of the tree. And then here's another big culprit that we see in landscapes a lot. This is ornamental pear. Look how narrow this branch angle is right here. We're getting down to probably maybe 20 degrees angle right there, very narrow. And we're gonna look at another picture of a tree here coming up shortly, the result of poor branching structure in the tree. And so this is definitely something you want to avoid, either by tree selection, choosing species that have good branch angles, or through pruning during the dormant season. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute.
Great, thanks, Sarah. All right, Wayne, you get the first pictures. And these are high res and really interesting. And this particular viewer found this little critter on his spinach and kind of wondered what it was, on his Swiss chard, and then is wondering, what it is doing. And then he found these eggs, and he thought he was going to watch them and see if they hatched into that or something else.
I ruined your spiel by telling you about it before.
I know you
didn't I?
did, but you'll notice I didn't tell the audience.
That's true, you did not. What we have here, those are eggs. Those are what we expect of fly eggs. They typically tend to be longer and narrow like that on a lot of our flies. And that first picture was a very good picture. It's highly unusual to find that outside of its mine. It's a spinach leaf miner. It's a type of fly, and they do mine in between the top layer and the bottom layer of the leaf. And then they leave this papery looking mine. So if those that you were watching 4 weeks ago when I showed Columbine leaf miner, it's very similar. In the case of this person, I believe they wanted to know about some organic options. We're getting to the point in time where we're past the opportunity to really control these, especially since they're harvesting. You want to hit them in the spring or in the fall if you're going for a fall crop, and you can use an azadirachtin type product or a insecticidal soap that does not contain sulfur. Those are two from the OMRI list if you're looking for organic options to control that particular pest. But floating row covers, as they're going to demonstrate later on in the program tonight, are an excellent choice as well, especially since we don't need pollination for our leafy greens.
Perfect. There we go. All right. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, this is buffalo grass versus purslane rock. This viewer has a small plot of Cody buffalo grass that he's growing from seed. Cleared the grass, creeping Charlie, et cetera. He's been managing the weeds by hand. Patchwork sort of germination, but it's spreading, which is nice. And then all of a sudden, he's got more purslane than buffalo grass. He's wondering how he can manage it and whether he can use a selective herbicide or wait until the buffalo goes dormant.
Well, a couple of things here. Number one is I don't believe they put a mower on that spot yet. So right away, anytime we can thicken up a lawn, or if we can make it, thicker and more dense, then we're going to choke weeds out, especially weeds like purslane. They call it a poor man weed because it comes into areas that are very sparse, and it comes into gardens that aren't mulched. And so just from this standpoint, I'd get in a mower on that piece of ground almost immediately. You don't want to take it too short, but probably shorter than you're normally going to mow it. And I know we say you don't really have to mow buffalo grass that much. If you want it to spread in that first year, you want to treat it just like bluegrass and mow it every week and get it, mow it at about 2 to 2.5 inches just to force it to spread, because warm season grasses really love that. The purslane itself, certainly we don't want to see pulling and hoeing going on, because it spreads by internode sections, and any little piece of leaf, a really nice piece of work that Chris Proctor, one of our extension educator faculty, did, published a number of years ago, shows that pretty much any part except for the internode can actually sprout another plant. And then every time you pull a plant up, you have the potential to pull seeds up. So purslane seeds can stay in the soil about 60 years is the estimate. So every time you pull it up, you'll probably be pulling up seeds, because it's an extremely prolific seed producer. So before he or she decides to move, we're going to say that you could go in, and because it's sporadic, you could spot spray with Roundup and maybe burn it back, probably not have much results. Or he can just be patient. It's an annual. When we get into it's not choking out the other grass, and once he starts mowing, he'll probably knock back the seed heads and stuff, and then use a pre-emergent like Treflan or something similar, a lawn herbicide designed to keep, and then probably keep the seed down there. So I don't think I would do anything now. I don't think I want to, especially with the volatility of some of the broadleaf herbicides and what damage they might cause to his sensitive ornamentals as well as the neighbors. So I'd avoid any herbicide at this point in time. If it goes to seed, you're going to have seed there next year, but if you do the pre-emergent application next spring, probably around the first week of May, I think they'll be pretty happy with the results. But first and foremost, get a mower on that.
All right, thanks, Rock. Okay, Lauren, this is a Bennett viewer with blackberries, and they haven't really produced great fruit. They've moved them away, put them in a decent location. The fruit doesn't develop. He thinks it's viral, and removing them seems to be really the only option. And then he has a second question, which is there's some wild blackberries in the neighborhood, and he's wondering if the wild ones increase the chances for viruses of blackberries to spread.
Couple things on this one, particularly this picture. I was trying to look at the foliage, and if it is viral, most likely that foliage would be distorted. I really can't tell that this is. It does look slightly yellow, but it could just be new growth. So the thing I'd recommend, if they're concerned about a virus, is to look at all the plants, because all the plants wouldn't be the same typically with a virus. You would have isolated plants that would be mottled, or the leaves would be rough, or you'd have some stunting of those plants, and then you should have some healthy plants as well. The other thing to consider with this, if it's across the whole patch and it's several plants, is maybe it is actually just a poor pollination issue. Which could be the case where you just get a few individual components of that fruit. So as far as the virus, I would watch and look at all the plants. There are things that could move from wild brambles to others, so it is possible. But again, if you see anything in those plants that are unique, I would rogue the plants out that are affected, and then look at just starting, if you need to, remove those. But otherwise, if they look healthy, I think I'd just consider it being a poor pollination issue.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Excuse me. Okay, Sarah, here's your tree. And all she really wants to know is it salvageable? So this is storm damaged, and of course the first picture is person by tree.
Right, so you can't really see it in this picture, but you can see how big the tree is there in that picture. Now here in this picture, you can see we have a severe split. From a very narrow branch angle where this tree developed codominant leaders early in its life. I would say no, this tree is not salvageable. If you tried to bolt it together, realize that in the winter time there's going to be water that will get into that crack, and it'll freeze and thaw and continue to push those trunks apart. And as the tree gets more growth on it next spring and in years to come, and each of those sections get heavier, the chances of this tree failing are just extremely high. So I would say there really is no point at this point in trying to maintain this tree. I would just take it down and let it go.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, there are many kinds of hardscape options for your home. Patios, decks, and retaining walls come to mind, as do fences. Fences are a part of our landscape for privacy, security, and another creative design element. Along with that, we have the plants we choose to accentuate or even hide the fence. That's the topic of our first feature tonight. People put up fences for a lot of different reasons. It might be to keep the dog and the kids in or out. It might be to define a boundary between your property and the neighboring property. Oftentimes it's for privacy and that sense of enclosure on your own space. There are lots of different kinds of fences that people can choose from, starting with the beautiful iron or aluminum that are basically just the bars, moving of course to a solid stockade or rustic looking fence. You also have of course the old traditional chain link and some of the beautiful newer versions of that that might include goat panel with a great cap on it, or it might be the really simple, really inexpensive 6/6-10-10 welded wire mesh that is tied to posts. Oftentimes what happens is people get a fence up in their yard or placed, and then they look at it and think, oh gosh, I don't like the way this looks. How can I screen it? What can I do to soften it to make it look a little bit better than it does so I don't feel like I'm living in the backyard of a prison? Depending on whether you're screening or softening your fence, and depending on what that fence is made out of, that's going to determine where you put the plant material and what kind of plants you choose. So one of the hardest fences to screen is the white plastic. It's shiny, it's slippery, nothing will actually cling to it very well, and that means you're going to need to put plants in the foreground. Oftentimes when we're screening a fence so we don't have to see it, we want to be able to use plants that are very vertical so they don't take up too much space. If we choose plants that cling or climb, they can obviously be closer to the fence, but they have to be able to cling or climb or twine. The other thing that you want to think about is if you're softening that fence, it may be possible, depending on whether the fence is at the property line or a little bit beyond the property line onto your own property, you can put plants on either side of it. And in that way, the fence, even though it might be a straight line, sort of appears to appear and then disappear as those plants weave in and out. Think about whether you want a solid wall of green, which is essentially a living fence, or whether you'd like to go back and forth with some deciduous materials, some grasses, some shrubs that are going to flower that will give you a little bit more interest and perhaps make that fence disappear even further. Vertical evergreens are going to look like pencil points. You have options in the deciduous world as well that will be very narrow, but then if you add some rounded forms or some of those beautiful flowing grasses, you get texture, you get color, you get a lot of seasonal interest that you really can't get if you simply replace your fence with another fence. And of course, those twiners and viners are going to give you color like the fabulous mailbox clematis. So just as important as the materials you choose for the fence are the plants that go in front, behind, or even woven through the fence. And there's some really nice examples around. Okay, Wayne. She didn't ask much of a question other than squash and pumpkins and what is getting them.
Well, if you start in this picture, it looks like maybe the plant is wilting, but it's hard to tell because we don't know the time frame from when they picked it off until they shot the pictures. But there is that hollow stem in there. There is the potential at this point that there's squash vine borer in there. Mm-hmm. So if you see it starting to wilt at a particular point and you have the rest of the vine that can still grow and produce, you can just sacrifice that one piece, get rid of it, get in the trash can, burn it, do something to it, but get it off the property so that you don't have that caterpillar escaping and then reinfesting another vine right there in the garden. Again, I think we covered this 4 weeks ago as well, but your floating row covers work again if you're willing to sacrifice the total amount of fruit that you can get off of that vine. Otherwise, you're looking at a permethrin type product, maybe a carbaryl type product on the anodes of the vine where they typically tend to lay the eggs, and that's where the caterpillars first get in. Otherwise, you need to keep those off of the blooms to protect your pollinators.
All righty, thank you, Wayne. Rock, this viewer has a turf, and then he has things in the turf, and at least 2 different kinds of grass-like plants that he does not want in that turf. He wants to know what they are and how he can get rid of them.
Well, the one with the spike seed head on it is either quackgrass or perennial ryegrass, or maybe even annual ryegrass, but I don't see it on it. So and I believe he mentions in the note that it was easy to pull, so I'm going to guess that's ryegrass. And ryegrass, Nebraska summers will pretty much take it out over the next 2 or 3 years, and as long as he's mowing it, you won't really see that seed head. It is a little bit off color, but other than that, the rest of the lawn should choke it out. The other one that we showed, so it's the picture, a little bit closer look at the seed head would be really helpful. When I see that seed head, it looks like an oat grass. We have some that are prevalent in the state, but I can't tell which one it is. And I'm pretty sure that one is a perennial. It's probably going to get excessive worse. There's no selective control. You're going to have to spot treat it with Roundup and either reseed or if you've got it's just a small patch that dies out, you're going to kill a little bit of the desirable grass. But other than that, you can hand dig them. I don't know how prevalent it was in the yard, but there's a couple of options on that one. I need a little bit of a better picture or even a sample before I can say definitively what that grass is. First I thought it was fall panicum, but it's not because of that seed head. So can't help them much on that other than the fact that it's obviously perennial because of a basal growth and probably going to have to spot treat with Roundup.
All righty, thank you, Rock. Lauren, this is a viewer who has potatoes and tomatoes in raised beds, and they've been wilting, dying, and some herbicide damage, but the potatoes started doing this. He pulled them out, and they appear to be rotted and covered with numerous white awfulness. So what is it herbicide? Is it pathogenic? What is it? What's going on here?
Couple of things. If we go back to one of the pictures where you can see all the little white dots on the tubers, yeah, right there. So those are just lenticels that are swelling and growing kind of a carky growth. That'll happen with excessive moisture with potatoes. So that's the white growths you're seeing. Now the stems and the rot, looking at this from the picture, if it's a soft rot, and it's kind of hard to tell with the image, but I believe it's probably a blackleg, which is a bacterial disease, and that would be for sure confirmed if when they look at this, if it's a very soft and watery rot. If it's not, there's a possibility there's a phytophthora that affects potatoes as well, that it could be to cause that black stem discoloration. But in either ways, I think it looks like it's an overwatering situation because these would both be those would both be favored by overwatering. So I would, watch your watering. If they are in the containers that were shown, you should be able to regulate that pretty well. And if they're in that situation, then I would recommend just complete sanitation at the end of this year. Or if you're at the end and they're all dying, exchange that and just start with completely new soil. And in fact, even bleach your pots if you're going to reuse those pots.
All right.
It will be a storage issue for any potatoes if you have a lot of them. They're not going to keep very well.
All right. Sarah, your next question is a viewer who has arborvitae, and they've replaced every other one, and they've done this instead. So she's wondering what to do about it. It is not a part of the state that we typically think of growing arborvitae in, but what do you think is going on here?
Well, arborvitae just isn't really very well adapted in Nebraska, and it really struggles here, even in the eastern part of Nebraska. Unless it's in very protected urban environments, arborvitae has a lot of issues, just with winter survival, with our hot summers, with hot, dry winds. It's a plant that's much more adapted to like Oregon and Washington, where they have cool weather and lots of rain. So I guess in the long run, I would suggest you just choose a better plant. And if you want something that's going to be a kind of a tall, skinny hedge type evergreen, then you might think of Taylor juniper. That would be a good choice. Otherwise, if you really want to persist with the arborvitae, then you really need to watch the water. Make sure that they have good, consistent moisture, especially in the first 4 to 5 years of establishment. You need to make sure they're mulched, and those plants weren't mulched around the base. So I would put about 3 inches or so of a nice wood chip mulch around the base. Keep the grass back so the grass isn't competing with the trees. It would be helpful if you provided them with some kind of wind protection. It looks like they're right out there in the open next to a road, and they're probably getting lots and lots of wind. But there again, that's just going to make maintaining water in the soil really, really critical. So those would be the things I think you could try and see if the plants would survive better. But again, they're just not really well adapted in Nebraska, so they're going to struggle.
Right, and that was Broken Bow, so really.
Way west, yeah.
Way west. Well, a beautiful garden is made up of a wide variety of ornamentals, fruits and vegetables, as well as herbs, which is what we're going to look at this week in the Backyard Farmer Garden. Here's Nebraska Extension educator Terry James to tell us more.
This week week in the Backyard Farmer Garden, we're going to look at our herb garden. We've had lots of people stop by and check it out in our last couple open houses that we've had, and people ask a lot of questions. What we tell them is if you're using herbs for culinary reasons, you need to make sure that you keep the herbs from flowering. Those flowers actually take a lot of the essential oils out of it. So for the culinary purpose, it's going to lose a lot of the flavor when you're cooking with it. On the other hand, a lot of those herbs are great pollinators. So if you want to attract pollinators and you really don't need to use them for any culinary reasons, go ahead and let them bloom. Most of them have beautiful flowers. There are a few that will seed themselves about, so make sure that if you have fennel or dill in your garden and you don't want them to seed about, go ahead and cut those seed heads off. Otherwise, you will have fennel and dill all over forever in your garden, which really isn't that bad of a thing. So stop by the Backyard Farmer Garden this week and check out our herbs.
Since we love our pollinators, we really haven't cut back much on our herb garden yet, but especially with those dill plants, we had to cut them back before they went to seed. We've had dill all over the Backyard Farmer Garden. It's fine with me, but most people don't like quite that much of it, except your insects, your good insects, right?
Yes, my black swallowtails.
Your black swallowtails. All right, speaking of insects, this is an interior insect question. She's seen a small flat bug with a narrow body, usually on a bathroom floor, but it can crawl on the walls. She thinks it's a fire brat.
Could be.
What is a fire brat?
So fire brats and silverfish are very similar. So a silverfish has the silver scales all over the body and really looks like a fish as it swims or crawls along the walls or on the floor. A fire brat lacks the scales. They're very closely related. They're the same things. Usually they're related to excessive moisture in the house. So find out where you've got extra moisture. Maybe it's using a dehumidifier. Nebraska summers, sometimes you need one, and you get that dried out and you can help take care of that problem. Just be careful if it is a silverfish and you do smash it on the wall, smears are hard to get out.
All right. Okay, Rock, this is an Omaha viewer. They put on triazicide by Spectracide, and they had applied the same product in April. And then he mowed on the longest day of the year, mowed the lawn. That's why you got the question, lawn question. And all of a sudden, moths all over the lawn. So what the heck?
So are they associating it with the spray? Do they think the spray caused the moth?
That's what they're...
I'm struggling with the concept.
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
I think
Spectracide is a brand name, and then they have various
Right.
components. So the triacide is a herbicide, but spraying a herbicide would not cause moths to, unless, I don't know if there's any saprophytic moths or whatever. You need to help me out on this one, Mike.
Well, the timing could be we are getting into miller moth season,
Yeah.
and they could just have the first wave landing in their yard.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand. Sure, but it sounded like only where they sprayed. I kind of overinterpreted it, perhaps. But it's just
Maybe it opened up a few good hiding spots.
It's just stinking moths already.
Sod webworm, any possibility?
Where was it again? Where was
all
it?
over the lawn.
No,
Omaha.
Omaha.
Sod webworm, maybe?
Yeah, they tend to be more prevalent in the West, but
Yeah, but usually when you get solid webworm, you get low flight hovering over, and then you get the mowing and patches where they're at, where it clips it down. Kind of like those rabbits that Dennis can't defend tonight. It's not here.
In other words, mowing the lawn and releasing the moths are totally unrelated.
You know, he could have had
it's coincidental.
he could have had a really long spots in the lawn, because usually those moths will get into those longer, taller patches of turf more because there's more better microclimate for them.
All right, enough.
Are you
Moths. Enough on the moths. Okay, Lauren, brown spots on pepper plants, are they doomed?
No.
That's a speed round
Even though
question.
it's not like yeah.
There are some different causes of those, and,
Yeah.
and without seeing it, it's impossible. But there are bacterial spots, there's fungal leaf spots. Avoid overhead irrigation, and if you can, mulch always in your garden.
All
That'd be the
right,
best thing.
thanks. Sarah, we've had this question a bit already, but this one is a little more specific. Planted Blue Lake stringless green beans. Seems to have a lot of beautiful vine and great foliage. No buds, no flowers, no beans setting on. They were planted the 2nd of May. Worried a little bit about too much, not enough sun, but they're getting sun for 6 hours. So any ideas on why no beans?
Well, I mean, it would be better if they were in, 8 hours or more, full sun a day for a vegetable plant. That would be preferred. The other thing I would think about would be fertilizer. Did you fertilize heavily this spring, or did you maybe amend the soil with a lot of compost this spring? A lot of nitrogen in the soil can really promote leaf growth at the expense of flower development, and so you can end up with these really beautiful plants, but no fruit setting on. Another possibility, if you are seeing flowers but they're just not setting, we did have a period of some pretty high temperatures, 90s last week, and so there may have been some pollination issues. Those would be the first things that would come to mind for me anyway, Kim.
All right. Okay, Sarah, ready?
I'm ready.
We have a viewer who wants to know if it's okay to mulch their garden with straw, and if so, can they just go ahead and till that in the fall?
Yes, you can use straw. The only concern there is that sometimes straw has a lot of weed seed in it, but yes, you can till it in the fall.
All right. We have a viewer who has a 40-year-old Colorado blue spruce. The lower limbs are dying. What's up and what can they do?
We need to probably see a sample. Could be shade, could be some fungal diseases, could be cankers, could be borers. So, I mean, there's several possibilities.
All right. When do you harvest and then replant the sets off walking onions?
You can harvest them whenever they're mature. So whenever they've developed a good size and the leaves underneath them are starting to kind of turn yellow, then you harvest those little bulbils at the top, and you can replant them immediately. You don't have to save them, but if you can't replant, then just keep them dry and you can plant them in the fall.
All right. We have a Milford viewer who says they don't have any fruit on anything this year. What's up?
When you're looking at multiple species of plants, pears, apples, plums, and small fruits, then I'm thinking it's some overarching issue, some pollination issue, or something along that line.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. What are we ready like tonight, Lauren?
Tonight, I am ready like caramelized onion smoked Gouda cheese dip.
It's a little better than lunch meat, and now we're hungry.
We're moving up.
Okay. We have a viewer who had a big mulch pile delivered, and there are moldy leaves right in the middle of it. Is that going to worry in the garden? Do anything?
I wouldn't worry too much. You want to make sure you don't have a lot of green material in your mulches, and it's better to let them rest a bit until you move them in.
Okay.
Wouldn't worry about a disease.
We have another pepper question. This person actually says they have brown spots on the peppers themselves, not on the plants. What do you think that is?
On the fruits too, you could have a bacterial spot that gets on the fruit. I've also seen even anthracnose, other fungal diseases on fruit. So the biggest thing on those is watch when you harvest them, because your storage isn't going to be very well.
Okay. An Aurora viewer says that they have no needles on the interior branches of their firs and spruces in their windbreak. Is that disease likely?
You just have to be careful to assess that. It could be a needle cast disease, which oftentimes gets inside the canopy of the tree and won't be on the outside growth. It could be just some natural shading out as well. So I'd really want to look at that carefully before I made a decision.
Okay. A zucchini totally collapsed and there's no borer activity. What's that all about?
It's probably one of the cucurbit wilt diseases, which are typically can be vectored by some insects, or the other thing, it could be just a fungal wilt, which we have fusarium wilt in zucchini that could happen.
Okay, and they'll have more anyway, so it doesn't make any difference.
They're going to have plenty of zucchini typically.
Okay. You ready, Rock?
Sure.
Okay, it's buffalo grass night. This is a husband-wife debate. Will mowing the buffalo grass while it is tillering encourage or discourage more of the tillers?
Mowing while it's tillering, mowing anytime is going to encourage spread, so that would increase tillering.
All right. We have a viewer who wants to know how to control that pretty little blue dayflower.
In what, buffalo grass or?
In regular lawn and landscape beds.
Yeah, they're relatively easy to pull, but my guess is that they really want to control it. Any of the broadleaf herbicides would probably work, but I think pulling it there, it comes up really quickly, and it's an annual, so why worry about it too much?
Okay. Along the purslane lines, we have a viewer who wants to know whether they should put it into the compost since it spreads so easily.
Well, it's not going to spread once it's toast.
And on that note, are there any broadleaf herbicides that are selective only for violets?
No, but selectivity is a misnomer. We're not going to have something that only controls X and not Y.
Okay. Is there any organic way to permanently kill bindweed?
Maybe the boiling water routine. No, there's no, no.
All right, nice job. Ready, Wayne?
I think I'm gonna have to bank off of Lauren. I'm ready like an open bag of chips.
Ooh, oh, okay. I'm hungry. All right, there is an insect attacking and killing cedars in Custer County that's coming over from Colorado. Any ideas?
On cedar, about the only thing that really gets into it and actually attacks the trunk would be cedar bark beetles, and they usually attack stressed trees.
Okay. Do backyard sprays like cutters have an effect on our pollinators?
It's all about timing. If you put it off during the middle of the day when pollinators are active, you're definitely gonna have a negative effect. You're gonna have a less of an effect if you do it in the evening when the mosquitoes are active that you're targeting.
Perfect. We have a viewer with lily of the valley that this time of the year turns brown and then cobwebs form. What's up with
I
that?
hope they don't have a spider mite problem.
Okay, that's probably. A Hamilton County viewer has perfectly round holes in their rose leaves.
Leaf cutter bees, leave them be.
All right, leave them be, so to say. Japanese beetles, do you use the pheromone traps or not?
If you use the pheromone traps, move the traps away from desirable plants because you're going to be attracting a lot of beetles into those traps. And monitor your bags as well because they can fill rapidly, especially if you're in a heavy infestation like some parts of Omaha. And I have seen where people are working on how to compost them. So,
Composting Japanese
yes.
beetles?
What else are you going to do with all those beetles you have in those
You're
bags
supposed
in
to
the
put
trap?
those in your neighbor's yard then. Is that the deal? Good deal.
We actually found Japanese beetles on Tuesday when we were up at Jazz in June on city campus.
Well,
Jeff
I
was
saw one
unhappy.
today by the East Campus Union.
Well, did you squish it?
No,
What kind of an entomologist
I was late
are
for an
you?
appointment. I was moving.
All right, you get the next picture question. I do. Oh no, plant of the week. Sorry, Sarah.
I'm shaking the plant.
Now it's thrown
It's
its
gone
stuff
all over the place now.
All right.
So here in the middle we have, it's a deceivingly small sample because this plant can get rather large. It can get in the 3 to 6 foot height range. This is called Queen of the Prairie, or Filipendula is the botanical name for this particular plant. Really pretty flower head though, kind of reminiscent of a spirea or an astilbe, but within this kind of pale pink color that you're seeing here. The foliage is compound and it's kind of lacy looking and very attractive. This plant does well in wet soils, so if you have a wet area in your landscape, maybe a low spot or a drainage area, or you have a rain garden, this would be a great plant to put in there. And again, it's going to get big, so make sure you have space for it and maybe put it in the back of the plant border there. But it does tolerate clay soils, so it'll do well in some of our heavier soils here in Nebraska. And this is a true perennial. It's winter hardy to zone 3, so it does very well for us here. The second plant that we have here in the front is this one with the pretty kind of reddish or pinkish leaves. The botanical name for this is Iracine. This one is sometimes called chicken gizzard or beefsteak plant, but it's grown for the foliage. Similarly to how we use coleus, you would use it in that same way. It is a perennial, but it's not winter hardy in Nebraska. It's only winter hardy to about zone 10. So we can grow it outside in containers or ground beds. You can take cuttings and you can bring them in the house in the winter and then grow it over till next year. This one will do well in partial shade to sun, but you do need to protect it in really hot exposures like on the west or the south side. You might get a little bit of leaf burning. But it's a really great plant if you want to add some beautiful foliage colors to a container planting or to a garden.
All right, thank you, Sarah,
You
for
were
reminding me. And by the way, that Filipendula is in our backyard farmer garden.
Oh, wonderful.
So people can see how big it gets. All right, okay, now you get a picture. This is a Grand Island viewer checking the pear trees for pear slugs. Came across this thing, brought him in, didn't think it was moving until he watched it, and then it stuck its head out, and he wanted to confirm what it was and then what to do about it.
Well, if it's confirming, I'm not sure what he thinks it what is, but I will tell you it's most likely a bagworm. They get onto deciduous trees as well. I have found them on the linden trees in my yard. You treat them just like you do on our pines and cypress trees and cedar trees. And And just for our viewers' sake, I have seen them on palm trees. Nothing is really truly immune.
I've seen them on sides of building, not much to eat, but
At that point, they're probably searching.
all right. So not much to do at this
At
point.
this point, you can still hit them with something with carbaryl in it because they're feeding actively and you can get them. Just a topical spray won't work very well.
All right. Okay, Rock, you're up with this ground cover garden thug, and it was they purchased the house, and then here it is as it attempts to take over.
So this was the one we showed at the beginning. It's my sample, the painter's palette. And as you can see, it's fairly robust. It gets relatively large. And in this particular instance, the people moved into a house and they want to get it controlled because it's taken over their garden. But interspersed among there, they've got a lot of other little things that they don't want to get sprayed. So obviously, the broadleaf herbicides are going to be problematic in there because they're going to control the desirables, and we wouldn't recommend that anyway. But we can use the, I think Zach Riker, who used to be on the show, used to call it the glove of death, and it's simply a plastic Playtex living glove or a similar, and then you put a cotton glove over, and then you get some ready-to-use Roundup and spray it on there, and then just walk along and don't yank, and swipe it along the leaf if they want to go to the chemical route of the plants they want to control. It's going to take a little bit of work and effort, but that's one way to do that. They are rhizomatous, and it is perennial, but still they pull relatively easy. So if they just got in there and aggressively pulled that all out and then kept an eye on it and made sure that it didn't reestablish at that level, they could do that as well. So it's, if you're out there sitting there, I often weed with a beer in my hand. You only go one-handed, but at least you get some of them. But pulling it works. But if you really want to control the entire plant and maybe translocate into some of the other rhizomes, you need to use a systemic like glyphosate or Roundup.
All right, thank you, Rock.
I've been struggling with why I can't get enough gardening done, Rock, and you just solved my dilemma. Just have a beer,
in both.
You should need to have a beer in your hand.
All right, Lauren, this is all this person asked us is she found this on a walnut. She doesn't know if it's a rot, a spot, or an insect thing, and she wants to know if it's harmful to the tree.
This one, we're going to bounce around a little bit because it doesn't look like there's a leaf curl, like peach leaf curl, that this year was pretty favorable for on our oaks, but this does not look like that. And I was going to ask Wayne if he thinks there's any chance that's a parasitic wasp gall of some sort of a mite or something like that, where it's got that purple color to it.
Highly likely.
Okay.
I've seen some from oak where you'll have a pink end on both sides and a white stripe down the middle.
Okay.
The amount of gall variation that's out there is tremendous between mites, midges, parasitic wasps, things like that.
So probably not a disease, but maybe some sort of insect.
And when it comes to insects and mites like that, these things come and go. So enjoy the show.
Right. So, and the fun part about clients or our viewers asking that is, again, they don't know. Is it a rot, a spot, an insect?
Sure.
Or both? And was that
A lot of
slime mold
times
on the tree?
Yeah, it's challenging for us too, because a lot of them look very similar. So
They do.
Good question.
All right. Sarah, this viewer, they live in Sarpy County. They planted this plant on the south side of the house. They don't know what it is. It's 6 feet tall, it flowers and smells great. She does want to know if it'll flower all summer. So what is it and will it flower all summer?
This is elderberry. And no, it won't flower all summer. It'll have probably a 3-week bloom period or so. And then after these blooms fade, you'll have some little green berries that come on that will ripen to black. And those are edible, so you can harvest them. You can make jam or jelly or something like out of them. So yeah, it's elderberry.
And it will sucker and form a monster colony.
Right? It will spread itself.
Which is great. All right, well, a simple and quick way to keep some of those bugs from munching on your produce is to put a row cover over it. For our second feature tonight, Sarah's going to demonstrate not only how to do it, but right now, why it's a good idea to get it installed.
Row cover fabric is a tool that gardeners can use for several different benefits in the vegetable garden. Early in the season, it provides cold temperature protection. And depending on the weight of material you choose, it can give you anywhere from 2 to 5 to 10 degrees of temperature protection for the early season garden. Here in the mid part of the summer, row cover fabric is used primarily for insect control.
as an organic or an integrated pest management strategy to keep insects from getting to your vegetable garden plants. You can apply row cover fabric in 2 different ways, either as a floating row cover where it just lays on tops of the plants with no structure provided. We're going to install a low tunnel, which is basically a supported structure with row cover fabric over the top of the PVC supports on this small row of squash. Row cover fabric is a poly spun bonded type of material. Comes in a variety of weights and sizes. You can get it from your local garden center or from an online nursery. For summer purposes like this, we're going to use a very lightweight row cover fabric. The pipe that we're using today for our supported row cover structure is a very flexible PEX pipe. It's a little bit better than regular PVC pipe, which is not quite as flexible. So what we'll do is take the PVC pipe and push it into the ground on both sides of the row, and we're going to use about 4 different pieces of PVC pipe down the length of this short row. Once we have the row constructed, we'll lay the row cover fabric over the top of the PVC pipe. Now, for good insect control, it's important to fasten the fabric down to the ground. We're using metal landscape pins to hold the fabric in place to keep insects from getting in and to keep the wind from taking the row cover fabric off. You could also just use soil piled on the edges of the fabric, or you could use bricks. That would work well to hold the fabric in place as well. So the row cover fabric is going to keep the insects from getting to our plants. Now, squash do bloom and the flowers need pollination. So we'll have to take the row cover fabric off to allow the flowers to pollinate, or we could hand pollinate the flowers if we wanted to. But the row cover fabric is going to provide protection for our plants and keep the squash bugs and the squash vine borers away. Since we're using our row cover today to protect our plants from insects, it's important to inspect your plants before you put the fabric on to make sure you're not trapping insects underneath the fabric. So do a close inspection and look for squash bugs or squash vine borer eggs and get rid of them before you put your fabric on. Row cover fabric is reusable, so you can take it off and use it again from year to year. Remember, in the middle of the summer, it's important to use a lightweight row cover fabric so your plants don't get too hot on a very warm summer day.
And you will want to pay attention to that temperature inside those row covers. You don't want to bake those plants until that squash is ready to go in the oven. And you do want to protect them from the insects. So that's a good demonstration. It's not up there because I think you took it away, didn't you?
We did. We took it down. Yeah.
Shoot. All right. You have 2 caterpillar questions here, Wayne. The first is east of Lincoln. And who is this eating the iris leaves? Good guy or bad? East of Lincoln.
Oh, I had to dig a little bit to figure this guy out. And I think it's a Henry's marsh caterpillar. Okay. I've seen them before. They're around. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you find it and you can remove it, I just do that.
Okay.
As far as control.
All right. And then in Cumming County, they found this little hairy fast guy, black face and lime green close to his body.
This is salt marsh caterpillar. It can vary a lot in color that you see, and it does vary on the age of the caterpillar, what you can see in coloration. They feed on a wide variety of things and generally not something that you're going to have to worry about. If it gets into something, I have seen salt marsh caterpillar get in pretty thick on rhubarb. And it can be one of those things you just need to watch it. And you have a problem, take care of it by hand.
Okay. All righty. Thank you. Okay. Rock, this is an Omaha viewer. They had an autumn purple ash removed. Stump was professionally removed to 6 inches, 4 feet wide in the affected area. They reseeded with a sunshade lawn seed. They've had great success with the seed in the other areas of the lawn, and it looks like this where that stump was.
This is one of 2 things. I'm going to go with what I think it is, and then I'll throw in this other possibility. But first of all, anytime you leave back a bunch of wood chips or anything into soil, they take forever to decompose, and they compete for the nitrogen. So it's not surprising. I get the impression that that was what the original seed mix was. It's not surprising how yellow it is. So a little bit of nitrogen, and even really quickly available nitrogen, urea or something that avoid that in a hot summer day. But a little bit of nitrogen may go a long way just to pulling that out of it. A a little bit of organic matter to maybe enhance the microbial activity a little bit. The other thing I might be concerned about is if they didn't remove any of the sawdust, that can really seal up a soil in eastern Nebraska. That the silty clay loams that we have, they're already tight to begin with, and then it's just further tightened with this fines and stuff that get even locked into those really. So if it's probably too late to do anything about it, so they want to accelerate that degradation. But one way to do that is just start dumping some nitrogen on it. Don't get it carried away with it because you don't want the grass plant to grow too fast, but you'll see a point where it's going to start showing some color. It's probably going to be mid to late fall before they really see much of anything, but a little bit of organic matter, a lot of nitrogen, and just turn your head whenever you walk by that spot.
All right. Lauren, this is another found something on a tree. This is, she found this stuff on the limbs of a red oak, and she's wondering what. And they're downed limbs, obviously.
Yeah, so this is pretty common, particularly on elk, even, or on oak, even some of our softwood trees, you can see it as well. This is auricularia, so it's Auricularia, and this is a really common colonizer. It is one I don't ever recommend eating any of the mushrooms that you collect in the wild, but it is one that there are species that are commonly eaten. So
Okay.
anyway,
All right.
not doing any harm.
Okay. Sarah, another storm issue. This particular viewer has a blue spruce, and this is up toward Omaha, that went over, kind of, sort of. And he is wondering whether, in fact, this particular spruce can be stood back up straight. So what do we think here?
Well, when the soil gets really, really wet, sometimes trees are more prone to being pushed over like this. And we've had some really tremendously heavy rains, 4 inches in just a matter of hours. Whether or not this tree can survive is a little bit hard to say for sure. Even though there's not a big mound of soil pushed up on the uphill side of this tree, there definitely has been root damage, and there's roots that are broken and ripped in the soil. And it could be that this tree, and it could be the reason that this tree was pushed over is because it has underlying root issues that were compromising it to begin with. So could have been some girdling roots, or it could have just been poor root development for whatever reason in that soil. You could try to pull it back. I would probably only give this tree maybe 50% chance of surviving this. What you may see is brownie needles developing later in the summer, continuing on into the fall, and then possibly the tree not looking good next spring. You can try, but again, I think you only have maybe even odds that this tree would survive.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Well, we have a couple of announcements of things in the gardening world, the first of them being the Gesneriid Society's National Convention Show and Sale, Saturday, July 8th in Omaha. We have, for more information on the screen for people who are interested in that. And then, of course, we are doing Produce from the Heart, donations of the extra produce on Tuesdays in our backyard farmer garden. And we have a number of Grow-A-Row donations, 42 pounds total, and the backyard farmer gardens. We have actually contributed 146 pounds, so that's a pretty cool program. All right, we have just about a minute, so bang, bang, we're going to see what we can do here. This is a viewer who wants to know, is ACECAT an effective emerald ash borer treatment?
Say that again.
ACECAT.
Not familiar with that particular product. I wonder if they were meaning acephate.
Probably acephate. Maybe.
It could be, but we're at that time of the year where we don't want to be trying to treat for emerald ash borer. We want to do that in the spring when those trees are actively pumping a lot of nutrients up from the roots into the rest of the tree, so it carries whatever treatment we're applying up to the ups and tops and ends of that tree.
Okay.
At this point, don't treat.
Okay.
Don't believe anybody that wants you to treat.
And don't do it.
Just don't do it.
Just don't do it.